Everybody always says you need an emergency fund, but do they really take the time to explain why? What is an emergency? What is the logic behind it? A lot of people will also say, I have zero money to save. There's no way, it is impossible that I can start an emergency fund. Yet, these are the same individuals that are overpaying their credit card, where if the minimum payment is $25, they're putting $50, they're putting $100 because they are working it down and they are making it happen and they're getting it done. What ultimately happens, thinking big picture, is when an emergency happens, most people are very reliant on those credit cards that they have focused on paying down versus having that emergency fund to actually buy and pay for the things that are a tried and true emergency. Today's video, we're going to be breaking down the importance of the emergency fund, what it is, and kind of teaching yourself the self-habit of paying yourself first and making sure that you are saving for the emergency fund. So the emergency fund, by definition, is an account that you set aside funds for an unexpected emergency. This is outside of your savings. This is outside of your investing. This is literally set aside for an emergency and an emergency only. Now, what does this teach you to do? What is considered an emergency? Is it that your car is broken? Yes, could be an emergency. Is it that your TV is broken? Nope, not quite the emergency. Do you need a surgery? Is your house flooded? Perhaps something in your brain that screams emergency that shouldn't really be an emergency, that is really looking at a summer vacation, looking at something that is nice to have, but is it a true emergency? Is it a true necessity for you to live, such as a vehicle, a home, food, things of that nature can be considered emergencies, but those are things that should be budgeted for. So what are some of the emergencies that we see, guys? Number one, job loss. Job loss, of course, is a huge emergency. The emergency fund, not only can job loss be very stressful, but this can be a time where you might have to land back on your feet, and having that emergency fund is going to cover some possible necessities, and some including paying mortgages, paying card payments, paying things that are going to be and can be detrimental to not only your credit score, but also your ability to find another job. If it is a house, if it is a car, this can be defined as an emergency, guys. This is going to be something that ultimately you're going to get a much better job than you had, being much happier and make much more money when you do get that other job. Number two major emergency is a health cost. Medical expenses are very unpredictable. Both medical and dental are huge emergency needs that most people do not plan for. They're not setting up the HSA. They don't have the insurance. They are not planning for those unexpected emergencies that come with both medical and dental expenses. Then when it comes up, of course, they go right back to borrowing on their credit cards. When you look at broken limbs, when you look at the complications of surgeries, when you look at paying and covering those costs to keep not only yourself, your kids, but also your pets. If you do have cats, dogs, lizards, iguanas, sloths, whatever you may have, guys, there could come emergency expenses for those individuals as well, which you have to make sure that you do cover with this emergency fund. Number three is looking at the car. The car, of course, is your method of transportation if you have to drive to work, if you are not a commuter. But if you have to be really driving to work, if you have to commute, you don't have an option, guys. This means it is going to be emergency. Now, this does not mean that the emergency fund is going to be used to buy a new car. It is not going to serve as a down payment. It is not going to serve as a payment for the actual car unless there is a true emergency such as a job loss. But this means that small maintenance, if you need an oil change, it could possibly be built into the budget. But again, if there is something detrimental that goes wrong, let's say you have a tire that breaks. Let's say, you have an unexpected emergency that leaves you on the side of the road. This is where the emergency fund can come in, guys. If you need to replace a tire, if you need to, do small maintenance, this again does not mean that this is going to replace essentially the maintenance fund that you have for your vehicle or the money you're setting aside for the vehicle itself. This again is an emergency. Unexpected family matters. This always happens if something happens out of state. Let's say it happens out of country. If something happens to family or friends, this might be a part where you have to utilize this emergency fund to really cover some of the expenses for another individual. There can be various costs that are associated with unfortunate events, which make it very unfortunate at that point. Again, if there is someone who passed out of town, you have to all of a sudden buy a plane ticket. You have to fly out of town. You're going to have rental cars. You're going to have hotel expenses. That is an unexpected expense, and that is an emergency expense, guys. Again, I cannot stress this enough. And the same, number five, we look at housing. This is not looking for home improvements. This is not looking for, furnishing your house, buying new things within your house. This is the emergency fund that is strictly for repairs. You have a broken window. You have a leaky roof. You have a sump pump that goes out that floods your basement. This is not getting a new TV. This is not, really putting out fashion. Even over time, guys, there should be another savings that kind of complements this that is not used on your emergency fund. So if you have a washing machine that's 10 years old, it sounds like it's gonna break any day. That should be something that is essentially budgeted for. That is not what you're gonna use the emergency fund for when it actually breaks. Now, if you do it right, guys, and you set up this emergency fund, and also remember, the emergency fund is established before the debt repayment. Let me really stress that, guys, is your emergency fund is before you start repaying the debt, because what's gonna happen is you're gonna go through, you're gonna be repaying debt, an emergency happens, you're gonna rack up debt to the amount that you've been paying off, or even higher in some cases, because you do not have the funds available to cover the unexpected expense that you're experiencing, meaning that you're going right back to borrowing. It is a system and a cycle that is going to keep you stuck there forever if you let it. You have the power, you have the ability. Even getting that emergency fund, it shouldn't take you more than probably a month or two to get that emergency fund, to save up that $1,000 in that emergency fund. That might be selling a couple things. It might be getting a side hustle for a little while, working with DoorDash, doing deliveries, whatever it may be to establish that emergency fund. Once you have it established, guys, if you have to use anything in that $1,000 emergency fund, so again, it's something out of town, there's an emergency with your car, there's an emergency repair, there's a broken window, whatever it may be, once you use some of the money within that emergency fund, number one step goes right back to replacing it and replenishing it right back to that $1,000. Once you establish that $1,000 threshold, putting the money away might seem like a huge constraint that holds you back from making some purchases. A lot of the purchases in a lot of places, guys, if you are truly focused on and want to build up this emergency fund, you'll do it. It is really, again, like I say, a lot of times, responsible adults taking accountability for their finances, even as a younger generation, guys, putting aside that $1,000 is going to make a game-changing difference for the rest of your life, because not only does it establish the saving habit of the emergency fund and setting money aside, but it also gives you the restraint of buying things you might not need with the money that you do have earmarked for that emergency fund. Now, again, this is not a savings, this is not an investment account. This emergency fund is literally set aside from everything else, that has its own bucket, that lives by itself, that you use for true emergencies. So all right, guys, that'll do it for today's video. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the emergency fund and the need for it. And as always, thank you guys for watching.